They mocked her for believing in second chances. The cowboy proved her right every single day. Clara Thompson had never been what people called ordinary. Even as a little girl, she had a certain light in her eyes, a hope that refused to dim no matter how often life had knocked her down. Growing up, she had always believed in second chances. She believed that people could change, that mistakes did not define a person forever, and that forgiveness was a gift more powerful than resentment. Most people, however, had laughed at her idealism. Her teenage years were a mixture of dreams and disappointments. Clara had been a bright student, loved reading stories about people overcoming impossible odds, and often stayed up late writing letters to herself about the future she hoped to create. But life had not always been kind. Her first real heartbreak came when she was 17. She had trusted someone completely, someone she had thought would never hurt her, only to be betrayed in a way that left a deep scar. From that moment on, Clara's trust became fragile. She became careful, choosing to observe people before opening her heart. Yet, unlike many who would become cynical, she never lost her faith in the good within others. She learned to separate the mistake from the person, to look beyond the surface, and to believe in the possibility of change. That belief, while often mocked by her friends and even family, became a quiet, unshakable part of who she was. In her late 20s, after years of city life and the constant rush of work, Clara realized she needed a change. The city, with all its noise and chaos, had made her feel small. She wanted space, air, and a life that felt real. When her beloved aunt passed away, leaving behind a small farmhouse in a quiet rural town, Clara saw it as the perfect opportunity to start fresh. She left her apartment in the city, packed her belongings, and drove for hours through winding country roads until she reached the town. The town was nothing like the city she had left behind. It was small, surrounded by fields and forests, where neighbors greeted each other warmly and everyone knew everyone else. The air smelled of fresh grass, pine, and earth, a stark contrast to the asphalt and smoke of the city. Clara stood outside her aunt's farmhouse for the first time, taking in the red brick walls, the creaking porch, and the large barn that had clearly seen better days. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of calm, a sense of belonging that she hadn't realized she had been missing. Moving into the farmhouse wasn't easy. The house was old and it had its quirks. The water heater didn't work properly, the roof leaked during heavy rains, and the garden was overgrown with weeds. But Clara didn't mind. She found joy in small accomplishments, like fixing a broken hinge on a door or clearing a path in the garden. Every day felt like a new beginning. She made lists, planned renovations, and started imagining the life she could build there. It was during one of her trips to the local market that she first noticed him, Jake Lawson. The moment was almost cinematic, though Clara didn't know it at the time. Jake was a cowboy through and through, with rugged features, sun-kissed skin, and a kind of quiet strength that drew attention without him even trying. He moved with ease, handling horses and supplies like they were extensions of himself. To Clara, he seemed almost too confident, too fearless, and yet there was something about the way he smiled, just slightly shy, just slightly crooked, that intrigued her. Their first interaction was brief and awkward. Clara had dropped a basket of fresh apples, and before she could bend down to pick them up, Jake had already stepped in, gathering the rolling fruits with a gentle efficiency. "Thanks," she said, her voice slightly flustered. "No problem," Jake replied, handing her the last apple. "Looks like someone's in a hurry today." Clara laughed softly, a sound that caught him off guard. "Something like that," she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. It was a simple moment, yet it lingered in her mind for days. There was something different about Jake, a story behind his eyes, a depth that she couldn't quite place. She didn't know then that the town had its own opinions about him. Whispers of his past mistakes, failed ventures, and bar fights floated around. Most townsfolk kept their distance, believing he was trouble waiting to happen. But Clara, with her unshakable belief in second chances, felt something else, a curiosity, a hope, and a strange sense of familiarity. Over the next few weeks, Clara settled into her new routine. She spent her mornings tending to the garden, afternoons working on the farmhouse repairs, and evenings reading by the fireplace. She enjoyed the simplicity, the feeling that each day was her own to shape. And yet she couldn't help but notice Jake. Their paths kept crossing at the market near the barn, and sometimes along the dusty roads. Each encounter was brief, polite, and tinged with an unspoken connection. One rainy afternoon, Clara found herself struggling to fix a broken fence near the edge of her property. The rain soaked her clothes, mud splattered across her boots, and the wooden posts refused to cooperate. Frustrated, she muttered under her breath, feeling a wave of loneliness. That's when Jake appeared, seemingly out of nowhere, holding an umbrella. "Need a hand?" he asked, his voice calm and steady as if he had anticipated her struggle. Clara hesitated. Pride and caution battled within her, but something about the genuine offer made her nod. Together they worked in silence, side by side, the rain forming small rivers along the wooden fence posts. Jake's strength was evident, but so was his care. He didn't rush, didn't judge, and never once made her feel incapable. By the time the rain eased, the fence was sturdy, and Clara realized she had enjoyed his company more than she expected. From that day on, their interactions became more frequent. Jake would offer help with repairs, share stories of life on the ranch, and sometimes just sit quietly, watching the sunset. Clara began to notice the subtle ways he had changed. The way he treated animals gently, the way he listened more than he spoke, and the patience he showed in simple tasks. It was clear that this was not the same man the town had whispered about. He was someone different, someone trying, someone real. Despite the growing connection, Clara faced doubts. Memories of past betrayals lingered, warning her to guard her heart. Friends from the city who still kept in touch would tease her. "You're falling for a cowboy with a reputation," they said. "Don't you remember what happened before?" But Clara, quietly determined, refused to let fear dictate her choices. She reminded herself that everyone deserved a chance to show who they truly were, including Jake. Life in the small town continued with its rhythms and routines. Clara discovered the joy of simple pleasures, baking fresh bread, tending to her small flock of chickens, and walking along the fields at dawn. And always in the background, Jake's presence lingered like a comforting shadow. He wasn't perfect, and he never claimed to be, but Clara saw the effort he put into his life and into the people around him. That effort mattered more than a perfect past. By the time the first few months had passed, Clara felt a sense of belonging she hadn't known in years. She was building not just a home, but a life full of small victories, lessons learned, and the quiet hope that sometimes people could change for the better. She still remembered the early days when others mocked her for believing in second chances, and she smiled to herself, knowing that some lessons could not be taught, they could only be experienced. And so, in the gentle rhythm of rural life, amidst the laughter of neighbors, the rustle of fields, and the distant call of horses, Clara's story began. It was a story of patience, resilience, and the belief that trust, when given wisely, could open doors to unexpected joys. And somewhere in that story, Jake Lawson was slowly becoming a part of it, proving, in ways small and subtle, that sometimes, even the most unlikely people deserved a second chance. Clara's life in the small town had settled into a comfortable rhythm, yet something about it made every day feel alive. She woke with the sun, tending to her garden and the small animals she had started to care for. She discovered a deep satisfaction in simple tasks, the rhythm of planting seeds, the gentle sound of water pouring into buckets, and the smell of fresh bread baking in her oven. Each day, she felt a little more at home. Jake, too, had become a part of her life, though their connection was not simple. At first, their encounters were brief and polite, but over time they became longer and more meaningful. He would stop by the farmhouse under some pretext, to deliver supplies, to check on her repairs, or just to say hello. Clara noticed that despite his reputation, Jake carried himself with a quiet patience and kindness. He listened more than he spoke, and when he did speak, his words were thoughtful. He never judged her, never tried to impress her, and yet he had a presence that was impossible to ignore. One afternoon, Clara found herself struggling with the old barn behind her farmhouse. The wood had rotted in places, and the door had started to sag on its hinges. She tried lifting it herself, but the weight was too much. Her frustration grew with each failed attempt, and a sense of loneliness crept in. It was then that Jake appeared. "Need a hand?" he asked, tilting his head slightly. There was no judgment in his tone, only genuine concern. Clara hesitated for a moment, pride and fear of trusting someone battling within her. But she nodded, grateful for the help. Together, they worked to repair the door. Jake moved with skill and care, showing her how to measure, saw, and fit the wood. He didn't rush, and he didn't treat her like she was inexperienced. Instead, he encouraged her gently, praising small victories and offering guidance when needed. As they worked side by side, Clara noticed something subtle in Jake, a consistency in his actions that she hadn't seen before. It was one thing to say you had changed, but it was another to show it, day after day, in small gestures that required no recognition. He carried water for the animals before helping her with the barn. He fixed the broken gate on the neighbor's property without complaint, and he always returned borrowed tools promptly. It was clear to Clara that this was a man who valued responsibility and integrity. Despite these moments, life in a small town came with its own challenges. Gossip traveled quickly, and the townsfolk were not shy about sharing their opinions. "You're spending too much time with Jake Lawson," they would say, often in hushed tones that somehow carried their weight. "He's trouble," they whispered. Clara could feel the skepticism in their eyes and hear it in their words, but she didn't let it deter her. She had learned that people often judge what they don't understand. Jake's past mistakes were his own, and she was determined to see the person behind the reputation. One day, while repairing a section of her garden fence, Clara overheard a conversation between two neighbors. "I don't know why she bothers," one of them said. "That Lawson boy hasn't changed. People like him don't get second chances." Clara paused, gripping the wooden post in her hands. Her heart sank slightly, but only for a moment. She reminded herself that the world's judgment didn't define the truth. She had seen Jake's actions, his efforts, and his care. That was what mattered. The days grew warmer, and with the change of season came new tasks. Clara decided to host a small gathering for the town, hoping to build connections and show that she was committed to being part of the community. She invited neighbors to help with the garden, share recipes, and exchange stories. To her surprise, Jake offered to help with the preparations. He arrived early one morning, carrying tools, fresh flowers, and an enthusiasm that made Clara smile. As they worked together, setting tables and arranging flowers, Clara realized how much she had come to rely on Jake's presence. He was steady, reliable, and surprisingly thoughtful. He anticipated what she needed before she asked, whether it was carrying a heavy box of supplies or fixing a wobbly chair. Each act, no matter how small, spoke volumes about the man he was becoming. The gathering itself was a success. Neighbors shared laughter, stories, and food. Some who had once whispered doubts about Jake began to notice his genuine nature. He didn't seek attention or praise. He simply contributed, quietly proving himself through action rather than words. Clara watched him interact with the townsfolk, her heart swelling with a mixture of pride and relief. She had believed in second chances, and here in front of her eyes, that belief was being validated. Yet even as life seemed to fall into a peaceful rhythm, challenges arose that tested Clara's trust. One evening, a misunderstanding occurred at the market. A disagreement between Jake and another townsman escalated into raised voices. Clara, witnessing the tension, felt a familiar pang of doubt. Memories of past disappointments whispered warnings in her ear. Could she truly trust him? Was his change genuine, or was it simply a temporary effort? Jake, however, handled the situation with grace. Instead of reacting with anger, he apologized where necessary and diffused the tension with calm, measured words. Clara observed quietly, realizing that this was the difference between a person who merely promised change and someone who truly lived it. His actions were consistent, even under pressure, and that consistency reassured her more than any words could. As the weeks passed, Clara and Jake grew closer. Their bond was not built on grand gestures or dramatic moments, but on daily actions and shared experiences. They worked together, shared meals, and exchanged stories about their pasts, hopes, and dreams. Clara began to see the depth of Jake's character, his determination to improve, his respect for others, and his willingness to confront his mistakes. Each day, he proved that people could change when they truly wanted to, and that effort was more meaningful than perfection. Despite the progress, Clara remained cautious. Trust was not given lightly, and she knew that the past had taught her valuable lessons. But she also knew that she could not let fear dictate her life. By observing Jake's actions, she allowed herself to hope, to imagine a future where the mistakes of the past did not define the present. The town continued to watch, some with curiosity and others with skepticism. Clara's belief in Jake challenged their assumptions and forced them to reconsider their own judgments. Slowly, attitudes began to shift. Neighbors who had once doubted Jake's intentions began to notice his consistency, his reliability, and his kindness. It was a subtle transformation, not just in Jake but in the community's perception of him. One afternoon, a minor accident occurred on Clara's property. A tree branch had fallen during a storm, blocking the path to her garden. Clara struggled to move it herself, and frustration welled up inside her. Jake arrived shortly after, helping her lift the heavy branch and clearing the path with care. As they worked together, Clara felt a profound sense of gratitude. It was not just the physical help that mattered, but the fact that he consistently showed up, proving his intentions through action. In these moments, Clara realized that believing in second chances was not naive. It was courageous. It required patience, observation, and a willingness to see beyond surface mistakes. Jake's efforts were a living testament to that belief. He did not need to declare his transformation. He demonstrated it every day through his deeds, his patience, and his unwavering support. The bond between Clara and Jake deepened naturally. They shared quiet evenings on the porch, watching the sun set over the fields, and laughed together while cooking meals in the farmhouse kitchen. Each shared experience, no matter how ordinary, became a thread in the fabric of their growing connection. Clara felt her walls slowly lowering, replaced by trust and a tentative hope for the future. Even as challenges arose, Clara remained committed to observing actions rather than being swayed by gossip or appearances. She had learned that true change was shown, not told. And Jake, with every small gesture, every thoughtful action, was proving that people could grow, evolve, and deserve another chance. By the end of the season, Clara felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. She had built a life that reflected her values, embraced the rhythm of the town, and most importantly, had allowed herself to trust again. Her belief in second chances had not been in vain. Jake had not only earned her trust, but had quietly begun to change the perceptions of the entire community through consistent, meaningful actions. Clara's days were filled with hope, work, laughter, and a growing connection that felt real and enduring. She knew the journey was far from over, and that challenges would continue to arise. But she also knew that the foundation they were building together, on patience, trust, and daily proof of character, was strong. And in the gentle, sunlit mornings, as the wind rustled through the fields and the animals moved quietly around the farmhouse, Clara allowed herself to feel something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Real, tangible hope. The kind that comes not from promises, but from watching someone prove every single day that change is possible, and that trust, when given wisely, can lead to something extraordinary. Life in the small town had grown quiet and steady, but Clara sensed that change was always just around the corner. The sun rose and set in predictable patterns, the animals went about their routines, and the fields shimmered in the golden light of early autumn. Clara enjoyed this peace, yet she knew that life, like the weather, could shift suddenly. Jake had become an inseparable part of her daily world. He came over frequently, offering his help with farm work, repairs, and errands. Sometimes he would simply sit on the porch while she worked in the garden, quietly reading or watching the sun move across the sky. His presence had a calming effect, a sense of reassurance that she had not felt in years. Clara had begun to trust him in ways she never thought she would again, and with each passing day, she allowed herself to hope that this trust was not misplaced. But life has a way of testing even the strongest foundations. One late afternoon, the sky darkened unexpectedly. Clouds rolled in from the west, heavy with rain, and the wind picked up, bending the trees and whipping through the fields. Clara was inside, tending to the chickens, when she noticed a faint smell of smoke. At first, she thought it might be someone burning leaves on a neighbor's property, but soon the smoke grew thicker, and a sharp, acrid scent filled the air. Panic rose in her chest. She ran outside to see a wall of flames climbing the distant hillside. The dry grass and trees were catching fire, moving quickly toward the properties in the area, including her own. The wind carried the flames with alarming speed, and Clara's heart raced. She knew she could not fight this fire alone. The barn, the farmhouse, the animals, everything she had worked so hard to build was in danger. Before she could think of a plan, Jake appeared, galloping across the field on horseback. His eyes were focused, calm, and determined. "Clara, are you okay?" he shouted over the roar of the fire. "I think so," she yelled back, her voice trembling. "But the fire, it's coming fast." Without hesitation, Jake dismounted and ran to her side. He took charge with a clarity and confidence that left Clara momentarily stunned. "We need to get the animals to safety first," he said. "Then we can save what we can of the barn and farmhouse." Together, they rushed to gather the chickens, goats, and a few other animals. Jake lifted heavy crates and carried them to a cleared field away from the fire. Clara followed his instructions, her fear battling with the adrenaline pumping through her veins. Every move was precise, every action mattered. The fire crackled and roared, sending sparks into the air like tiny meteors. Clara could feel the heat on her face, the smoke stinging her eyes, but she pressed on, driven by the knowledge that she could not let panic take over. The townsfolk began to arrive, some bringing hoses, others buckets, or any tool they could use to fight the fire. But Jake moved with efficiency, coordinating everyone calmly. He instructed them where to stand, how to form a human chain for water, and how to prioritize which animals and supplies needed saving first. Clara watched, her heart swelling with pride and relief. Here was a man who had once been judged harshly by the community, now leading with courage and intelligence. His actions spoke louder than any words, every gesture proving that he had truly changed. Hours passed, and the battle against the fire continued. Smoke filled the sky, turning the sun into a pale orange disk. Clara's muscles ached, and her lungs burned from the smoke, but she refused to stop. She moved with Jake, following his lead, and slowly they began to see progress. The animals were safe, the barn had been partially saved, and the farmhouse stood intact, protected by quick-thinking sandbags and fire breaks. At one point, a large gust of wind sent a burning branch tumbling toward the barn. Clara froze, her body rooted to the spot in fear. Without thinking, Jake darted forward, catching the branch and tossing it aside just before it struck the wood. Clara's heart pounded in her chest as she realized the risk he had taken for her, and for everything they were trying to save. He didn't hesitate, didn't complain, didn't even flinch. In that moment, she understood the depth of his courage, his loyalty, and the truth of his transformation. The fire eventually died down as the night fell. Exhausted, covered in soot and sweat, Clara and Jake leaned against the porch railing, watching the last flickers of flame vanish into the darkness. The farm had been tested, and while not everything was untouched, the worst had been avoided. Clara's relief was overwhelming. Jake looked at her, his expression gentle. "You okay?" he asked quietly, as if the fire had never occurred. Clara nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "Thanks to you," she said, her voice breaking. "You saved so much, and not just the farm, you saved me too." Jake shrugged lightly, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I didn't do it for thanks. I did it because it was the right thing to do. I wanted to make sure all of this, your hard work, this life you've built, was protected. And I wanted to be here for you." In the days that followed, the town spoke of the fire and the bravery shown by those who helped. But many people focused on Jake. Those who had once whispered doubts about him now had no choice but to acknowledge his courage, his intelligence, and his unwavering commitment to helping others. Clara observed quietly as neighbors approached him with newfound respect, offering thanks and admiration. It was a quiet vindication of everything she had believed, that people could change if given the chance and if they truly tried. Even as the excitement of the fire faded, Clara noticed the subtle ways Jake continued to show his growth. He repaired damaged sections of the barn without complaint, helped neighbors rebuild fences, and checked in regularly to make sure she was not overwhelmed by the work. His consistency was remarkable. Each day he quietly demonstrated his commitment, proving that the courage he had shown during the fire was not a one-time event, but part of the person he had become. Clara, too, felt a shift within herself. She realized that trust was not blind. It was earned through actions, through consistency, and through courage. Jake had proven himself over and over, not only in moments of crisis, but in the quiet, everyday decisions that defined his character. She felt her heart opening in ways she had thought impossible. The fear and hesitation that had once held her back were replaced with hope and a renewed belief in human goodness. One morning, a few weeks after the fire, Clara found herself walking through the fields with Jake. The sun was rising, painting the sky with shades of gold and pink. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of freshly turned earth and blooming flowers. Jake walked beside her, his presence calm and reassuring. "You know," Clara said softly, "I never thought I could feel this safe again, not just with the farm, but with someone." Jake glanced at her, his eyes reflecting understanding and warmth. "I know what you mean," he said. "It's not easy to trust again after being hurt. But you believed in me. You gave me a chance even when others doubted me." Clara smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "And you proved that I was right. You've shown me that people can change, that second chances aren't just a dream." Jake's hand brushed lightly against hers, a silent acknowledgement of the bond that had grown between them. It was a moment filled with unspoken promises, a recognition that what they had built together was strong, tested, and genuine. The fire had been more than a physical threat. It had been a test of trust, courage, and character. Jake had faced it with unwavering determination, and Clara had witnessed firsthand the transformation she had always hoped to see. In that crucible of smoke, heat, and danger, he had proven that he was capable of change, capable of responsibility, and capable of love. From that day forward, Clara's confidence in second chances was no longer theoretical. It was real, living, and undeniable. Jake's actions had silenced doubts, hers and the town's, and reinforced a lesson she had always believed but had been too cautious to fully embrace. That trust, when carefully given and nurtured, could lead to extraordinary outcomes. Evenings became their favorite time when the farm settled into a quiet peace. They would sit on the porch, sipping tea or simply watching the stars emerge in the clear night sky. The fields stretched out before them, calm and serene, a stark contrast to the chaos of the fire. In those moments, Clara reflected on how far they had come. The fire had tested their strength, their courage, and their trust in one another. And together they had emerged stronger, more connected, and more certain than ever that second chances were real. And the town had slowly returned to its usual rhythm, but the events of that day remained vivid in everyone's memory. Clara walked through her farm each morning, assessing what had survived and what needed attention. The barn had some scorch marks, and a few fences had been damaged, but overall, the farmhouse and animals were safe. Every small victory felt monumental, a reminder of how fragile yet resilient life could be. Jake stayed by her side, helping repair the damage and lending a hand wherever needed. He moved with patience, never rushing, never complaining, and always encouraging Clara. It was a continuation of the actions that had defined him during the fire, a demonstration that his courage and reliability were not one-time events, but part of his character. With every repaired fence and every restored corner of the barn, their bond grew stronger, rooted in shared effort, trust, and mutual respect. As they worked together, Clara reflected on how far both of them had come. She remembered the first days she had arrived in the town, uncertain, cautious, and wary of trusting anyone fully. She had believed in second chances, but even she had sometimes doubted whether her belief was practical. Jake had shown her that second chances were not a gamble. They were opportunities for growth, proof that people could rise above their past mistakes and become better, stronger versions of themselves. The townsfolk, too, began to notice the changes. Jake's reputation slowly shifted, from a man with a troubled past to someone dependable, courageous, and kind-hearted. People who had once whispered doubts began to approach him with genuine respect, seeking his advice or offering a hand with work around the farm. Clara watched these interactions with quiet satisfaction. It was as if the fire had not only tested their trust in each other, but also opened the eyes of the entire community to the power of change and redemption. One evening, Clara and Jake sat on the porch, the air filled with the scent of fresh grass and the gentle sound of crickets. The sky was painted with shades of pink and orange as the sun set behind the distant hills. Clara felt a sense of calm wash over her, a feeling she hadn't experienced in years. She looked at Jake, noting the subtle smile on his face, the warmth in his eyes, and the quiet confidence that came from knowing he had faced life's challenges and grown stronger. "You know," Clara said softly, breaking the comfortable silence, "I used to think second chances were just stories in books. I didn't believe they really happened in real life." Jake turned to her, curiosity and care reflected in his expression. "And now?" he asked gently. "Now," Clara replied, her voice steady, "I know they do, because I've seen it, I've lived it. You've shown me that people can change, that trust can be rebuilt, and that hope is never wasted." She paused, taking a deep breath. "You proved me right every single day." Jake reached for her hand, squeezing it lightly. "I just wanted to be someone you could rely on," he said quietly. I wanted my actions to match the person I wanted to be, and I'm glad I could show you that I meant it." The following weeks brought a sense of renewal to the farm and to their lives. Clara focused on improving her home, planting new gardens, and creating a small vegetable patch that would provide fresh produce for the winter months. Jake assisted where he could, often surprising her with little gestures, repairing a broken wheelbarrow, building a small chicken coop, or simply bringing her a warm cup of coffee in the morning. It was these small, consistent actions that made Clara feel secure, appreciated, and understood. The community, too, grew closer during this period. The fire had served as a reminder of how quickly life could change, and how important it was to support one another. Clara found herself invited to gatherings, potlucks, and neighborhood meetings more frequently. And Jake, once viewed with skepticism, was now a respected figure in the town. People began to see him not as a man defined by past mistakes, but as someone who had worked hard to rebuild his life and prove his character. Clara often reflected on her journey, realizing how much her own belief in second chances had shaped the course of events. Had she not trusted Jake, had she doubted him as the town did, she might have missed the opportunity to see the real person behind the reputation. Her decision to trust, guided by patience, observation, and intuition, had led her to a life filled with hope, companionship, and shared purpose. One particularly chilly autumn morning, Clara and Jake were clearing debris from a small corner of the garden when Clara paused, looking at the horizon. The sky was clear, and the first hints of frost sparkled on the grass. "It's beautiful," she said softly. Jake nodded, glancing at her with a smile. "It is, and it's even better when you've worked hard for it and protected it." Clara laughed lightly, a sound that carried warmth and contentment. "Yes. I've learned that protecting what you care about isn't just about the land or the buildings. It's about the people you trust, the relationships you build, and the hope you carry." Jake's expression softened. "I couldn't agree more. And I'm grateful that we've been able to build something together, something real." Their days continued in this rhythm, filled with work, quiet reflection, and shared moments of joy. Clara began keeping a journal, documenting her experiences, the lessons she had learned, and the small victories that made life meaningful. She wrote about the fire, the trust she had placed in Jake, and the countless ways he had proven that people could grow and change. It was a reminder to herself, a record of how belief, patience, and consistent effort could transform lives. As the first snowflakes of winter fell, Clara realized that the farm had become more than a home. It was a symbol of resilience, growth, and the power of second chances. The barn, once damaged, stood strong. The animals thrived. The garden, now dormant under the snow, promised new life in the spring. And Clara and Jake, together, had emerged from the trials stronger, more connected, and ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The town had also changed in subtle ways. People spoke more kindly to one another, offered help without hesitation, and were slower to judge. Clara noticed how the story of her trust in Jake had inspired others to reconsider their own assumptions, to give others opportunities to grow, and to recognize the effort people put into changing their lives. It was a ripple effect, small but meaningful, proving that one act of belief could influence an entire community. One evening, as the sky darkened and stars began to twinkle above the fields, Clara and Jake sat by the fireplace, sipping hot tea. The warmth of the room mirrored the warmth in her heart. She thought back to the early days, to the fears, doubts, and skepticism she had faced, both from herself and from others. And she realized that every moment of hesitation had been worth it because it had led her to this point, a life filled with trust, respect, and genuine companionship. Jake, noticing her thoughtful expression, asked, "What are you thinking about?" Clara smiled softly, looking into the fire. "I'm thinking about how far we've come, about the fire, the work, the people, and about you. You've shown me that second chances are real, and that trust, when given to the right person, can change everything." Jake reached out and gently held her hand. "And you've shown me that it's worth trying, worth being better, and worth believing in something bigger than ourselves. I'm grateful every day that you gave me that chance." As the winter months passed, Clara and Jake continued to grow together. Their bond was no longer tentative or uncertain. It was solid, grounded in mutual respect, shared experiences, and unwavering support. They worked side by side, laughed together, and faced challenges as a team. Every day was an affirmation of the lessons they had learned. That change was possible, that trust could be rebuilt, and that hope, when nurtured, could flourish even in the most unexpected places. By spring, the farm was vibrant again. The garden bloomed with fresh vegetables and flowers, the animals thrived, and the barn stood strong, a testament to hard work, resilience, and careful planning. Clara felt a profound sense of accomplishment, knowing that the life she had dreamed of was now real, shaped not only by her own efforts, but also by the actions of someone who had truly earned her trust. The story of Clara and Jake became known throughout the town, not as gossip, but as inspiration. People admired the way Clara had held onto her belief in second chances, and how Jake had demonstrated, through consistent actions and courage, that change was possible. Their lives together became a living example of hope, perseverance, and the power of trust. Clara often thought about the journey that had brought them to this point. The initial doubts, the small gestures, the fire, and the shared work had all been steps along the path that led to a life filled with meaning, connection, and love. She had learned that true change was shown, not told, and that patience, observation, and courage were essential in recognizing it. Jake, too, reflected on his journey. He had once been judged by the mistakes of his past, doubted by the community, and unsure of his own potential for growth. Yet through consistent effort, honesty, and courage, he had not only transformed himself but had also touched the lives of those around him. Clara's belief in him had been a guiding light, a reminder that second chances could lead to profound, lasting change. As they looked toward the future, Clara and Jake knew that life would continue to present challenges. But they also knew that together, they were capable of facing anything. Their trust in one another, built through action, courage, and consistency, was a foundation strong enough to withstand whatever came their way. And so, in the quiet beauty of the countryside, surrounded by thriving fields, healthy animals, and the warmth of a home filled with love and hope, Clara and Jake continued their journey. Every day they proved that second chances were real, that trust could be rebuilt, and that hope, when nurtured with care, could transform lives in ways that were profound, lasting, and deeply meaningful. Theirs was a story not of perfection, but of growth. Not of flawless people, but of people willing to try, willing to change, and willing to trust. And in that willingness, they found not only each other, but also the fulfillment of a belief that had once seemed fragile. A belief that every person, given the right opportunity, could rise above their past and create something beautiful, enduring, and true.